Welcome to the Real Estate Syndication Show. Whether you are a seasoned investor or building a new real estate business, this is the show for you. Whitney Sewell talks to top experts in the business. Our goal is to help you master real estate syndication. And now your host, Whitney Sewell.
This is your daily real estate syndication show. I'm your host, Whitney Sewell. Today our guest is Chris Wooten. Thanks for being on the show, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, I know we were just talking. We were both in the same mastermind, but we were at an event not too long ago, and it's like everything gets so busy. And I know you were in the middle of a couple deals, and we didn't even get to hardly catch up or introduce ourselves, other than maybe shaking hands or something. So pleasure to have you on the show. A little about Chris, in case you haven't heard of him before. He's retired from the Marine Corps after 20 years of service performing duties in aviation, asset management, and constant process improvement. Chris, thank you again for your service. I just want to say that right away. Grateful for that. He operated 4 single-family renovation teams remotely from where he was stationed in 4 different cities while still on active duty. That's not easy. Studied and exercised various real estate investing strategies to find the strategy that most fit his objectives of project creativity, flexibility, stability, tax advantageous, and scalability. And so, Chris, looking forward to getting into this and just what your focus is right now, because we all want those things, right? And you did lots of research, and I just love your background too. And just before we started recording, just how you talked about your focus was a process improvement, and how you quoted, you said do more with less. And it couldn't be more timely than what we're experiencing right now, and just that experience you have. So let's jump into that. But first, tell us a little bit about getting into the real estate. Like, why? You had a great career, in the service, which we're grateful for again. But now, why get into real estate? And give us just a brief how you got there.
Got it. So, I spent my first 15 years in the Marine Corps, largely on my own, traveling all over the world. Loved every minute of it. But then met my wife, got married, and everything was still good. And we were still moving around as the Marine Corps deemed necessary. And then my oldest son came along, and I was like, okay, things are starting to change. And then my second son came along, and I'm like, all right, I'm ready to be home a little more often. And I wanted something that I could control more of my schedule. And one of my commanding officers had always told me, he's like, the products that you come out with, that come out of your department, they're nothing short of amazing, and they always surpass anything that we could hope for. But you are a real pain of an employee. And I was like, guess I need to be my own boss. Great, I'll do this. So I saw the freedom in real estate investing, and just knew that I wanted to build that out. So by that time, I already had some single family rentals, had already started looking into wholesaling single families, and those things just really weren't for me. They couldn't hit my objectives. I accidentally got into apartments, and I saw that scalability, focus of effort, and being able to get more work done with less funds, less time. And I was like, I like that model. And it's much more tax advantageous. And there's all kinds of strategies you can dig into with that, cost segregation, bonus depreciation, et cetera. So I just kept working with that and letting that grow and growing my knowledge in that space. As I was getting ready to retire, I decided I was going to learn syndication, because I already had 2 buildings of my own, but I was running out of capital. So I'm like, how do I grow and learn this syndication thing? So I started digging into syndication a little over 2 years ago now, getting into it, understanding the legal pieces, the partnership pieces, the taxation pieces, and learning how to do all those things. I like to understand things on I call it a granular level, so a micro level, whether it be a project component or the administrative pieces. So I want to run through it the first time on my own and know all the granular pieces and how it all works. So I spent some pretty decent time digging through, going through projects, reviewing properties, talking with legal teams, talking with operators, and just putting it all together. And then got in my first syndication. It's been a little over a year ago for my first syndication, and was able to just in lockstep with the legal team, the lender, everybody. I knew exactly what to expect, and it made it a great process for me. And I just that's kind of how I developed into doing the syndication, and I like it. Obviously, I have continued to refine it because in that process, I saw some waste. So that's part of my process improvement hat coming back to me. I'm like, okay, we need to trim out some of the waste and just making some better processes. My next step, I will probably take down one more property, just with my regular syndication model, but then I am documenting my processes so that I can start building out my team. And so it kind of is happening in the background, but going forward, it's going to allow me to exponentially grow. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
Awesome. Okay. So, I wanted to go back a little bit. You said, like your first syndication was about a year ago, and you studied, analyzed on a granular level to learn that process, to really, dive in to know what to expect. And you said like you knew exactly what to expect. I would say there's very few people that study enough or study just enough in general, but to understand that much about the process before they've done a deal. And I wonder, like, what did you learn though that maybe you didn't expect, in that process? So, or did you just study enough that you did, you did it, or everything you expected happened, or was there anything that happened that was unexpected?
No, I can't say there was anything that was unexpected. We definitely exercised all of the extensions that we had built into the contracts. So those were things that I wasn't necessarily expecting, but I had war gamed into the plan. And the lender missed one of the timeline marks, and then the engineer came back and we had to jump another timeline mark, but we had these things pushed into the contract, so it wasn't an issue. We had to push some extra earnest money into the fund, but it wasn't an issue. We already had it planned out, war gamed, and the scenarios were there in case we needed them. I did learn a little bit more depth on the SEC attorney's role, and that was part of my headache. So when I was learning the syndication model, it was all too often I would come across operators that would just be, oh, that's the SEC attorney, just let them handle it. And I'm like, you pay them, but how do you know they're doing it right? So I really wanted to know. So I had interviewed several. I had a couple walk me through the bits and pieces to get to it. And I myself had invested in, as a limited partner in somebody else's deal that had been doing it for several years, so that I could see all the pieces of theirs and then go back and talk to another attorney. And it's just getting that exposure. It keeps you from getting into the analysis paralysis component that so many people talk about, because you can analyze so many different possibilities, but until you actually see one in the workings from someone that is reputable, that you've researched and believe in, you can't really put the model to work before you go in it yourself. So that just kind of helps propel you as you study it, you model it, you go along with somebody that you have some rapport with and you trust, and then by then you should be able to go pretty well on your own with it, and know what's coming up. So when we got into our syndication, I didn't have too many of the attorney side surprises when the operating agreement was coming out, when the subscription agreements were coming out, how we wanted to get it all structured. I was ready for all that. So it just definitely made things flow smoother, just taking the time to study it, exercise it, and then go.
Yeah, I love how you prepared yourself, and even interviewing numerous attorneys. You didn't just pick one and let them handle it. And so, we've interviewed numerous as well, obviously on the show, but business, our business offline as well.
Right.
We've talked to so many different attorneys, and just to understand, because they don't all do it the same way. That's for sure. But you can kind of believe that if you don't ask. You can think, well, it's just a process of syndication. They write a few documents and whatever, but it's just not They're not all created equal, that's for sure. So,
Yes.
tell me a little bit more about just your training process for yourself, because I feel like you did a great job of educating yourself, so you knew this process, you had it laid out, and I feel like the listeners and myself could benefit from that. But just how you really dove in enough to educate yourself. I feel like sometimes people don't know where to go to educate themselves, especially when we start talking about syndication. They're like, oh, it just seems like this thing that's bigger than we can grasp,
Right.
when you're used to doing smaller single family, or maybe you've never done a deal. So how did you do that?
So I had, I don't read much. I'll catch snippets off of headlines and some blog articles and stuff like that. Most of my book content I take from Audible, or I take a ton in via podcast. And when I was active duty, it was 35 to 45 minutes drive one way to work. So I had plenty of time to go through an Audible or podcast. And you can train your mind to take that stuff in at 1.5 times speed, 2 times speed, whatever. So I run at 2 times speed now. So chipmunk speed. So I can take in a lot of data and retain it. So I took in some bigger pockets material, but they're very broad range of everything. So they tend to not get real deep on some of the topics. So I listened to some other podcasts that were talking about multifamily, how to grow in multifamily, and then some of them would start to come in with syndication. So then I started to seek out syndication specific podcasts, so then I could start to learn more from those environments. Um, and I probably listened, oh man, I would probably say well over 100 podcasts, truthfully, because this was a good year before I went to my first conference. So I prepared myself and just bits and pieces, taking notes. I'm still doing the single family thing on the side while all that's going on, but just getting ready for what's to come. And then I went to a conference, and I realized at that conference that they weren't going as granular as I wanted. They were hitting, how do you review a deal? How do you find a deal? How do you review the deal? And then when you're running it, here's what your expenses should look like. But they didn't really get into, how do you syndicate the deal? They didn't really get into, um, how do you go into closing on a deal, and what things do you need to expect that are going to be different from any of your experiences, if you have any, from the single family closing experiences. They didn't go into any of that, and I was kind of like, not a big fan of this. And they didn't go into the lending protocol differences in the commercial space, which are totally different, because you need to be prepared for your KP, GP, LP pieces, be able to
Right.
talk to it all, explain it. And if you go talking to a lender and get hung up on those kind of things, they're liable to give you the stiff arm and go, no, we're not going to work with you because you don't know what you're talking about. And this likelihood this property could flop because you don't know what you're talking about. So I knew enough from all the podcasts and everything and the couple of books that I had taken in through Audible, that conference just wasn't deep enough. So I went and I started researching multiple conferences, and found one that I really liked, and it gave me the additional pieces and resources that I needed. Uh, I didn't necessarily learn it all from that conference, but the one little granular piece that was missing, I met 3 people at the conference that I could talk to later, and just networking with people to get those granular pieces. And they were all 3 lawyers, so it worked out.
Yeah, your network is so important, right? It's so important, and
Yes.
conferences have helped me a lot as far as just increasing my network and building teams. But so awesome, But I know you and I had talked about how one of your strengths is really the asset management side and underwriting, and I'd love to dive into some asset management specifically right now. Just with everything that's happening in the market, as we speak, and so I'd love to know, just maybe you can elaborate a little bit on learning just the asset management piece, and then I'd love to just dive into to what that looks like on a day-to-day basis for your weekly basis, and how that's happening, managing and with or without the current downturn,
Mhm.
just what that looks like, and then maybe what you're doing differently now, or in addition to, or whatever that looks like because of what's happening. So give us a little background on just educating yourself about asset management, and then just like daily processes.
Okay. So asset management. So one of the reasons that I got into the multifamily space, and even when I was doing single family renovations, it was the idea of being able to beautify and bring a better product, potentially a better living situation to the residents. And I enjoyed that with single family, and I wanted to continue that in the multifamily space. So having that the service after service, to being able to serve the residents and give them a good environment, see what else we can do to make things better for them, um, is just, you can't put a price tag on that. When you start to turn a property and the reviews start to change, you'll start to just have people coming in droves, wanting to get into your property, not necessarily because of the price. And so many people get wrapped around the axle of, oh, it's got to be the lowest price to have just tons of applicants. No, you don't. It's customer service first.
Mm.
And so many people forget about that. And if you start there and then push that on into your property management team, then they're going to maintain the property in a more tidy fashion. And I mean, even some of the residents will start to take pride in their own property, and they will start to take care of the property themselves as well. So all those things help you out on the day-to-day physical component of the property. You tend to get much quicker maintenance requests. And you can look at it from two different ways. It's like, oh, they're bugging me because they've got the smallest little thing happening. But that small thing, you take care of it right now on the spot. It doesn't become a big thing later. So it is good to have that, to where people are wanting to keep things in good working order, because yeah, they're paying a little bit more for it, but they're getting great customer service, and the overall environment is better than the surrounding properties. So doing that, and then like I say, it becomes part of the culture of the property management team, and it helps everything build. That piece helps eliminate a lot of the waste. I kind of hinted at, as far as you're just picking up around the property, you get faster maintenance calls as far as requests coming in, because the residents are more apt to just say, hey, I've got this little thing happening. Um, Come and take care of it, take a look at it, whatnot. And you're more on top of things, and you get rid of some of those degrading components that could happen later. So that helps you out. And then your key ah, KPIs, so your key performance index components. I like to look at those weekly, and especially early on. And early on, first 90 to 180 days, I like to look at them twice a week, just to get it. It's sometimes hard to track, especially if your property management team's not used to having all their reports cleaned up that frequent. But you want to track how much traffic had we have coming in, how many move outs, how many move ins, and kind of see your close rating, as far as, you've got X number of people coming in, here's how many leases you sign. Or are they disqualified applicants? And if so, are they all coming from the same source? You need to change that source. So you look at these metrics, and you get rid of the waste. I mean, if you have an ad out there that's pushing to the wrong audience, and they can't come through your application process, you need to change step one, which is your marketing. You don't need to loosen up your protocols for your residents, because you don't want the headaches that may come out of that. That's a whole nother wasteful event. Um, so there's so many. Process improvement is literally so granular at each level, and there's so many things that you can tangibly go diving into. But that's the front end, getting the culture right, and you can clear up a lot of the waste in there. And then your KPIs, if you're keeping track of your conversion rates, keeping track of your occupancy, keeping track of your expenses, all those things grow together. and the property management team will start to learn what your expectations are, and it just becomes easier. So your first couple months can be rough, just it's getting to know each other, and you may have different demands than other properties, and that's okay. And maybe you have to change property management because they just can't adapt. And it is what it is. But you got to really build that culture, focus on those KPIs to make sure that you're tracking what's actually happening, and then knowing what lever to pull to go find the waste when your KPI starts to come a little off.
Great advice, and I love just the culture dynamic too, and how you talk about like building that first and how much that saves you.
Mhm.
Just having that, and the culture improving or improvement around the property, and whether it's tenants or whether it's the employees, the staff. But
Right.
can you share any ways that you've helped improve that culture? On a specific property even, or any examples, where you've gotten tenants on board or staff, so they do feel
Mhm.
like it's their property.
So I've got one property. We took it on. We knew it was a solid C, but we kept having these interesting events on property. There wasn't damage. There wasn't any crime or anything like that happen. But we were seeing a lot of people walking through the property. We were seeing a lot of shopping carts showing up, and it was like, what is going on? And so we did a perimeter walk. And when we did our perimeter walk, what we found was the two adjoining apartment complexes, the back lot is kind of back in the woods a little bit. And someone had taken the time to, well, I guess good thing here, taken the time to take our wooden fence, privacy fence panels down. I mean, at least they didn't kick them in; they took them down. So, hey, thanks, and just slid them aside. But because of that, they were using our property as a thoroughfare. So we had all these random people that would walk through our property at all hours, because that was one of the big things that we heard about when we came on site was the residents would like more exterior lighting, the potential for security cameras on site, and we're just like, there's nothing happening that's kinetic, so there's something else. And it was just the passers through. Come to find out that the passers through were also keeping some of our residents that were distributors in business. So what happened was when we fixed the fence up, we stopped having that thoroughfare. We also went another step to lock up our exterior doors of our buildings. And then the residents had their exterior building key, and then they had their door key inside the building. Well, that crushed all of our through traffic, and the whole property started turning. We had more people, more of our resident base that would sit out on their balconies. They would hang out by the picnic tables. They've requested grilling stations come up this spring, and I was like, that sounds like a great idea to me. Let's make some gazebos and grilling stations. So we're putting that into the budget. But the residents have definitely started coming out of their shells more, and we've gotten rid of some of the knucklehead residents that weren't, like I say, weren't doing anything necessarily kinetic or harmful to anyone on property, but just stuff that we didn't want on property. And just by closing up those two sides of the fence, it started to take care of all of that, to the point that even last week, he's not the chief, but he's like a lieutenant with the local police force. They came by and kind of give us a kudos of how they could definitely see the change of environment just in our block, because you didn't have people hanging out on the sidewalks out in front of our property anymore. You didn't have shopping carts stacking up in front of our property anymore. Dilapidated cars that were getting left in the street in front of our property anymore. So those things started happening. And so not only did the residents take note, but even the city police force has taken note that and like I say, all we did was we closed off those two sides of the fence, and all these changes started happening. And we did lock up the buildings too, like I said, which just reinforced to the residents that when they're in their building and in their units, it's a safe place.
Yeah.
And they definitely took that to heart. Yep.
Nice, nice. No, safety is so important, and that they feel safe. That's for sure. What about? I appreciate that. And what about the KPIs? And we won't have a lot of time to go back into this, but yeah, I love how you mentioned just numerous things there. Talked about a weekly review, and how much traffic, how many move in and outs, and even you elaborated on something I wanted to highlight was. Are they disqualified? The people that weren't, aren't renting, and why are they disqualified? And is there a lot of those? And even thinking about changing your advertising, why are we attracting the ones that are not disqualified? I love how you brought that out. But are there, you talked about occupancy, expenses, conversion rate, any other things? And you mentioned like whether some demands that maybe property management companies may not be used to, but anything else that maybe you've added to that KPI list that you want to see every week from your management company that may be important?
I mean, the big thing is the expenses, and we deep dive many of them. So if we get an out of the norm invoice come across the table, whether it be from a pest exterminator, or a unit's water bill, or a power bill that's just out of whack, I'm quick to say, hey, put in a trouble call and let's have maintenance go check that out, because something's going on. When we got into the property, that was another one of the process improvement pieces, was to go through and do a full green package on the property. And the first month, you could tell from the month that it didn't have it to the month that the full package was complete, our expenses dropped over 30% just on the utility side of the house. So a very large drop in 1 month. And we've continued to see that even further decline as the residents get accustomed to it, and being able to schedule their thermostats and those kind of things. But we can see the spikes when there's a leak. It really stands out, and the leak can be a flapper valve in a toilet, but it really stands out a lot more when your units are running a much tighter water usage. You can notice those a lot easier.
Nice.
I had one unit, the resident, it was football season last fall, and they were running their air fryer out on the patio, and we don't allow that. And I was like, man, why is this one unit's electric bill so much higher than everybody else's? So I sent maintenance over there to check it out. And as soon as he walked up, on their patio was the air fryer next to the plug, and he's like, I bet they've been frying out here. So it's not allowed, but that's the reason it's so high. So we build it back to them and said, hey, get rid of that thing. The insurance says no. We say 25 feet away from the building, yada, yada, yada. So we were able to catch what they were doing because we've reined in the expenses so tight.
Nice. Great example. And so just a few final questions, Chris, before we run out of time. Tell me just the hardest part of this syndication journey for you. What has that been, just getting started up to now?
Hardest part for me, when I review properties, I review them at a very granular state. I war game them out, just to look forward to what could happen and to ensure we have stability going forward if things start to get shaky, which is playing out right now, and we don't have worries about our properties. So because I do that, I tend to pass on a lot of properties where they could potentially, and it's hard to think of it now because I'm like, whew, I'm glad I didn't take on this one, this one, or this one, because we were writing them snug. I like to have a little bit more room. And we ended up not getting them, so all is well, because we are where we are today. And it was that fast. Literally, we were looking at these just a couple of months ago. So I'm glad I definitely stuck to my guns, kept to my numbers, and kept to my very tight, what I look for in the margins, what I'm expecting to come out for returns. I've kept those very tight, and I haven't wavered from those, and those have kept me out of any concerns. But I've passed on several that could have been, and if we weren't where we are today, they still could have been. But now that we are where we are today, I'm like, whew, glad I didn't have to mess with that.
Well, I like to ask people like how they prepare for the next potential downturn, but since we're kind of in the middle of one now. You know, I'd love to know, you know, some of those things you were just talking about that said, okay, you know, this is a deal we're going to pursue. You know, we're prepared for a downturn, even though, you know, even if we pursue this opportunity. What would a few of those things be for you?
So I like, obviously, the T12. I want to see that, and I want to know that we've got a good spread as far as our net income to our debt service, and our DSCR is good. I also like to go ahead and peel back a little further to make sure there wasn't some blip in the last handful of months that all of a sudden brought that thing in to where it would be within our range. And I mean, I've had some that I've underwritten to where literally you go to month 13, 14, and it's a little askew, and you dig into that kind of, hey, what happened, and make them answer the mail. And then you really have to, do you believe them or not? And we had one that, oh, it was all CapEx, we spent XYZ, and they were able to give us reports. And I was like, okay, I'm comfortable with that. But then I had another one, oh, we just had a bunch of move-ins, this, that, and the other. And then when we started doing our lease review, not so good on the leasing side. And I was like, yeah, you just filled spots, and then weren't necessarily reporting the concessions correctly. So those kind of things will definitely keep you out of hot water, but you have to be willing to look on that granular scale and get deep on it to make sure you're verifying that your numbers and your valuation are true.
What's a way that you've recently improved your syndication business that we could apply to ours?
Good question. Big thing is for me, I worked for so many years in a vault in the Marine Corps doing the asset management thing. So a lot of my data compilation was all in a vault. My prior office was essentially in a vault because I didn't have any windows. So my wife would always make fun of me, just go back in your hole. And it was just a little storage room back in the back because that's where my office happened to fall. So I didn't get out that often. I did a lot of looking at data, a lot of digging through properties, talking to brokers, and even just real estate professionals in general, property managers, everybody else, to get leads for properties. But because of that, I didn't have the investor bandwidth to take down properties. So my best thing that I did was getting in with a real estate investing team and a mastermind. It eventually developed on into a mastermind to where being in that environment and networking with those people, I know they're not tire kickers, they're operators. And when I find my piece that I'm strong at, I go to those other operators, hey, would y'all want to partner up? I need help with X, Y, and Z. And they're like, oh yeah, I can definitely do that. And I can help fund here. And I can, okay, cool. Because my investor base is relatively small. So I can bring a certain percentage of it, but my strength is being the underwriting and asset management component. So I need investor relations. I need obviously the investor crew to come on board. And so just partnering up with people that are doing it, not just talking about it, has been probably my best thing. And then, like I mentioned before, is just developing the processes, recording the processes. So on our next acquisition, being ready to pivot so I can start bringing people on, helping to teach them and letting them work off those processes and let us grow as a group.
Great advice. If you're not tracking it, you're most likely not going to be able to improve it, you know? So, you know, tell us, Chris, you know, what's the one thing that's contributed to your success?
One thing to success would be just to, I kind of went into this speech when I was doing my retirement ceremony, understanding your why and keeping your focus on your why. So my why is having that, the freedom that real estate investing provides, and it's time freedom, it's financial freedom, it's all these different components, but freedom as a whole. And that allows for me, part of my why is the ability to be able to give back and to help propel others. So I have the freedom to do that, and I'm not just tied into a job.
Nice. And tell us how you like to give back.
So for me, giving back, I will mentor on a as long as I know you're ready to run and you're in for the long haul. I will do just a straight on one-on-one mentor. And I only do 1 or 2 of those a year because I only have so much bandwidth. But that's one of my give backs, is to pull the others up that want to do this. And then on the charity side of the house, I'm still involved with Toys for Tots, just Marine Corps pulling forward. So still involved with Toys for Tots. I'm a board member on the Military Sport Foundation up in my town that I'm in. So we are always helping veterans with jobs, with their homes, with their vehicles, with whatever their needs are. So those tend to be my focuses as far as giving back.
Love that. Thanks for sharing that, Chris. Chris, I'm just grateful to get to know you better, and just for your time, your service in the military as well, and just the way you've given back to the listeners and myself today. It's been great, educational for me, and I know they've learned a lot as well. Tell them how they can get in touch with you and learn more about you, though.
So you can catch up with me, wootencapital.com, or you can email me at chris@wootencapital.com. And we can just start conversing there. Obviously, I'm on Facebook, the Instagram, and all of those. Real Chris Wooten on all the social media platforms. You can find me on any of those as well.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Syndication Show, brought to you by LifeBridge Capital. LifeBridge Capital works with investors nationwide to invest in real estate, while also donating 50% of its profits to assist parents who are committing to adoption. LifeBridge Capital, making a difference, one investor and one child at a time. Connect online at www.lifebridgecapital.com for free material and videos to further your success.